Excellent. Okay, well, I have a fast-paced voice and it can be quite animated. I have a note to talk slowly and to also follow my notes, so let's see if I can do that. It's been a really good morning so far. I've been taking down lots of notes, trying to see where my points might connect. So I've made some small attempts to connect to previous speakers because it's quite important that we see what things connect across the board. And I'm actually pretty excited by one of the words that Terry has used in his address to you all, which is innovation, and I think it's important. And I just wanted to highlight that. Oh, there we go. Hello. That's it. That's my only slide. Hello. No, the opening slide there is to say that, look, it's a really exciting opportunity for me to engage with you today. Not many years ago, I was in your seat. So I've been a public sector manager before. I worked for the tax office for a number of years under the leadership of Michael Carmody. I had the privilege of learning what it means to go from a marketing context in a private sector organisation to what it meant to really market and communicate in a government context. And I think it shifted my whole perception about the value and importance of government. And it's a real honour to continue to work in government, though not being a public manager anymore. I'm now a consultant in the context of government work, and particularly public value challenges. So just a really, really short bio on the company that I'm an employee number 2 of. We started in Canberra. 10 years on, we are in 5 continents. We have 80 designers around the globe, and we really care about public value challenges. And they're often at the cross-section between government, non-government, industry, emerging industries, emerging players, and it's a really fascinating area, and we're all implicated in that. I've been asked to contribute to this topic around sound policy processes, fast-paced government, and can we bring them together? I'm actually fundamentally an optimist, and I'm a fairly big believer that things are always on the move to something better. That's just kind of in my innate character. So I see a real appetite and a genuine enthusiasm to learn new ways of both policy forming and policy delivery. I would say that about a third of my time, balanced between my design consultancy work and my academic work, is actually about coaching and building capacity in the public sector. So that's both at the federal and state and local levels in Australia, New Zealand and Singapore. And that gives me a lot of confidence that what I'm talking to you about is not Nina telling you, but I'm actually reflecting what I'm seeing. And people are really reaching out, and people like yourselves at all sorts of levels, to genuinely say, how can we continue to improve how we design and implement policies? I don't actually think it is broken. I think it's a recognition that it's just about an evolution and how can we be better. And it's something that we share as a global concern. It's not just an Australian or New Zealand, it's a global point. So really my talk was about how, and it's already been canvassed by Gary that design thinking is kind of the point of reference I'll make. I'm not going to give you a lesson 101 in design, so don't panic if you're going, great, I don't want to lecture on that. I do have 4 main points and 1 case study that I want to refer to. And it's a case study that's not actually about a human services system. A lot of design gets referred to in the softer systems and complexities. And I actually wanted to point to a harder system because I think it's important to recognise that these different approaches of working are quite valid in lots of different contexts. So I've got a couple of quotes to start. If you haven't heard this one, you must be under a rock, but most of you would have. And I like it because it constantly reminds me that we have to think different. So nothing is ever still. It's always changing and evolving, and that's exciting. It's frustrating for some, but it's actually exciting. It means that you can constantly be looking for how things can be done differently, and we have to approach those things differently with the way that we think. So there are the tensions between acting quickly, but the place that I come from is how might you find space in acting quickly by providing the right quality level of thinking. And some of the ways in which design thinking has really helped the public sector really move forward is actually to paradoxically transform thinking and services and policy by slowing down, which in the long run actually speeds it up, which people who haven't experienced it don't actually understand that. The second quote I wanted to share with you, this is actually by an American psychiatrist, and a best-selling author. And I just think the quote is useful in mindfulness that, and this word was used by Deputy Prime Minister Bill English this morning, that ultimately you are custodians of many public systems. And one of the things we have to resist is this ability to sort of bring it back to its simplest elements and to not recognise that systems are very complex, many moving parts, very independent parts that you can't control, and there's many interconnections that we have to try to navigate. So this is about emphasising how do we actually encourage system-level thinking and therefore develop system and design thinking skills and tools that can be applied across the public sector. So recently I spent time with 2 federal departments, and we predominantly focused on actually how to think at a systems level and zooming it down to the individual level and how those different mindsets actually help navigate some complexity and give people courage they can actually have a go. This picture I share with you is painted on our wall in our design studio in Canberra. It's quite a big size painting across the wall in our breakout kitchen area. And the reason why it's on the wall, Damien Newman is, if you just even Googled squiggle, you get the design squiggle coming up. And we contacted him to say, could we paint your squiggle on our wall? And he's like, yeah, it'd be awesome. And the reason why it's really important is that in a design process, you're actually embracing the concept of uncertainty in the beginning. But in the end, we are confident we'll get to a single point of focus. And in many ways, what I'm going through in the 4 key points today is sort of moving through, I guess, that design squiggle. And by having that on the wall, that's actually quite psychologically helpful when you're actually dealing with a problem or a context and explaining to clients, yeah, we're still at that left end of the diagram, it's all right. And people actually get a lot of therapy out of that. So if you need therapy, just go download that and stick it near your computer or wherever you work. So my first point that I want to make is that there's a need to make space for courageous exploration and reframing. What that means is a real appetite not to quickly try to bound a problem or a situation, but to really step back and embrace this idea of opening up the fuzzy front end. This particular picture is actually one of our designers, Kate, who is quite outstanding individual. She's extraordinarily passionate about very complex social issues, particularly Indigenous and social issues impacting people's effectiveness to live lives fully. And this particular photo reflects a week or a few days that she ran in a community-based workshop series in Canberra to actually explore this idea of can Canberra be innovative. Now, don't laugh if you're not from Canberra, but it's very true. In fact, is it Sarah Pearson? She's not here yet. She'll be here tomorrow. Is one of the CEOs of the Canberra Innovation Network. And basically, yes, every community can be innovative. And this was an example of opening it up, saying, well, what does that actually mean for us as a community? It's actually highly necessary to be courageous to explore, to see for possibilities. And it's highly challenging if people want to have an answer, because you're saying, I just don't have one yet. And that's actually a really different ask of you as public people, custodians of the public, to actually embrace that and make that step. So what that actually means, there's the word problem to the side there, is that in design thinking, too often we have the mindset, well, just tell me what the problem is and can we go work out the problem-solving process. So design deliberately is asking you to say, well, hang on a minute, how do we actually even frame the problem in a way that actually makes sense? So that willingness to explore opens up the possibilities of saying, well, actually, is the framing right? Is the problem that illiteracy doesn't work because at the age of 8, if they can't read, it's ruined for the rest of their life? Is that actually where the problem is, or is the problem somewhere else? So how do you actually not only reframe, but actually form a problem to actually focus on, and then go about it in a systematic way in terms of solving it? There are increasing demands on you to explain what is going on. So Bill English this morning talked about we need to stop reciting either the issue just a different way or recut that slide deck or those stats, but actually to find a different way to understand issues and what's actually happening. So reframing and design thinking at one level is about building a different level of empathy with the situation and what's actually occurring, and also seeking to find a different sense of alignment across many diverse range of stakeholders. Not trying to simplify it to a few or having the elite understand what's going on, but really breaking down those power imbalances. The second point I want to make, and it builds on this point of, well, it's about who is it, who's in the system, which is inviting early the everyday and having the courage to empower. I've used courage twice, and I've been quite deliberate about that. And I take a lot of, I get excited when I actually deal with a client from the public sector who has a lot of courage to say, let's try something different. Let's actually expose where we're at and actually invite people into this. It's not uncommon that those same people are in their organisations and cross boundaries saying, yeah, but everyone's not comfortable to engage yet because until we know exactly the problem or the thing we want to solve, let's just wait. So the typical consultation kind of narrative. We actually say, well, because we don't know, let's actually engage. So that's a bit counterintuitive. Because you don't know, therefore let's engage. So that's like saying, well, but surely we should have a position before we get out there. And the answer is you have to learn not to always have an answer. In fact, you should be learning to listen. So we've run some really great projects where the whole intent at the start is to say we need to suspend our judgment, our understanding of how things work, and we need to get out there and actually listen to the stories. So I think the opening address this morning was very much about that first point. Well, who's the customer? What's actually going on? So part of design thinking is the concept of empowerment. So any good governance literature talks about this, and I've spent time overseas during my PhD journey and met with some quite impressive people in the space of, really, employing the concept of empowerment. And Charles Ledbetter, quite a thought leader in the UK, talked a lot about the concept of empowerment and co-design, and people really shouldn't claim they're doing it unless they are. So are you really going out there? So we've been doing some work in the Indigenous communities, some of it off our own bat, not even commissioned by government, but just to build some relationships to understand. And it's really quite revealing that when we have had the opportunity to invite some public officials into those exercises, for some of them, they didn't even understand that a 9 o'clock meeting just doesn't start until 10. And that's actually okay. But people who hadn't seen that were like, well, what's wrong with everyone? Going, well, no, nothing's wrong with them. This is just a matter of course about how it works here. Or a community that has one telephone, one landline for 40 people. Everyone whinges why they're not doing certain things online. Well, have you been out there yet? So there's a fair bit about, empowering the voice of the people in the system and bringing to life what that actually really means. And these aren't always the hard luck cases, don't get me wrong, there's a whole spectrum of these things. But you're really trying to empower the people that are in the system. And I really like the quote by Richard Buchanan, another thought leader in design, around no one experiences a whole system, they just experience pathways through it. So it's another big concept about design thinking. Whose pathways actually are you trying to understand and invite in? The third point I want to raise is around the courage, another courage point, to face innovation blockers head on. So it's not uncommon that the concept of innovation gets lost because everyone gets caught up in the word, when really you're just in the business of creating value. You've done something that adds value to someone or something that they didn't have before. And some of the things that we see that can stop this, some of the blockers are that people just feel the problem is way too complex and therefore inaction occurs. There's just avoidance, or we focus on some other aspect. The context itself appears very rigid and incapable of change, and that can be personified through the people in the system, through the way it's organised and the way it plays out. And otherwise, there's also cases of years of resources and effort have been put in to no real dividend or difference. So the question becomes, what can you actually do to actually have the courage to face those innovation blockers head on? So I was really pleased to hear a couple of these terms coming up this morning already. So Dr. Catherine Haddon had said this previously about kind of slowing down to do things. So there's something interesting here. There's this tension that you face, I think, between fast stuff and slow stuff. Fast stuff says digital transformation office, 8 weeks, 20 weeks, get cracking. I think that's brilliant. And if you need to read the Elon Musk book, you do. If you haven't heard of him, you really should. The point being, it's about pace, making things happen, doing things for less, but also recognising certain problems are better for that than others. So one of the things I wanted to highlight is that part of what you need to be able to do is recognise that there are fast layers that need to innovate. Yes, the interface layers, the interaction points, the websites, the service layers, and that makes sense, right? Because if they're not working, things are fundamentally grinding to a halt. So they need to be dealt with quickly. But then there are layers that are actually stabilising layers in a system, and they are things like, how do you disrupt crime? How do you address family violence? How do you increase the use of renewable energy? They're slower systems, they're much deeper, and there's a lot more stuff that needs to be thought through. So what I want to highlight here is that design thinking has to embrace a bit of both, fast design and slow design. And with that means you have to bring judgment about when that needs to be exercised. I had interviewed a secretary recently about her views on thought leadership, and I think this plays to the point around slow design, which is slow requires you to be ahead of the political curve. So I've heard a few comments today about, from a ministerial political point of view, what you need to do. Part of doing design is actually to say we're not trying to react to what's been demanded of us. Yes, there is that as well. But this is also about looking for those opportunities in your respective jurisdictions and portfolios to go, well, hang on a minute, what if we could actually commission a bit of space to really look at what actually is happening in a particular aspect, that we may have some indicators isn't working as effectively, or there's something that we could do differently. You've been optimistic, we think there's an opportunity here. And so I just want to highlight that because I think we may not exercise that lever enough, which is the space to really commission some, slower design processes. My fourth point here is the ability to act through doing or experimenting. I talk to a lot of public servant people who generally get stuck, and I'm not talking about the secretary of the next level, I'm talking about that middle management that gets hit with, okay, we've got to do things differently, but I actually don't know the first step. I don't quite know what it fully means. And the idea of doing or experimenting is the courage, again, to actually take things out and to understand what they might mean into practice. This particular photo actually is from a project we ran in Singapore with the Ministry of Manpower that was actually looking at the injury claiming experience. And one of the people from that workshop actually explained that they never really understood the concept that prototyping, if it's done in an unstructured way, it really doesn't help you at all. It's just like you've done something and you get this awkward set of feedback and you either throw the whole thing out or you just ignore it. So they were explaining how they hadn't realised that through a very structured process of engaging with users and by doing it over, not just once, not having this big kind of worked up idea, then testing it and seeing if it's right, but constantly working it through with people, that they're able to see, wow, we could actually get a better project out of this. Again, this might be things you've all heard before, but the difference is, have you actually done it? The example I will explain to you in a minute actually talks about where our organisation is called Think Place, and basically for the project, I said we're actually called a Do Place because it was all about doing, not thinking. That was meant to be funny. You don't have to laugh at that, but at the time it was very funny when I said it. But the idea is that by doing, it actually empowers people to act. And I will give you an interesting observation. When I run programs in Australia, by the time it comes to the prototyping, we're extremely nervous Nellies. It's fascinating. It's like, oh, I'm not sure. You go to Singapore, unbelievable. They go for it, hell for leather. They're like, let's go out into a train. Let's go try this right now. Let's go test it. So there's something interesting in the appetite of different public sectors, propensity to even experiment and play. And I say play with seriousness, not to be trivial. So that's just something to take on board, which is to the act of actually making is actually quite important. And a lot of people don't actually do it in terms of actually getting in there. So the next point is around innovation, and I've used the word action, obviously reiterating the point of making. But the whole idea is that you act to learn. There's an awkward conversation happening that I hear, oh, we don't like the word failure, we don't want to fail. Well, obviously you don't want to fail at a big B policy in front of everyone and millions of people. But if you fail in front of 5 people and learn from that, that's a very different context of failure. Now, you might be all very on board with this and go, Nina, I get that, but a lot of people I talk to get fundamentally confused between doing to learn and to improve versus, well, we don't want to fail around here. So there's just a real balance between what are you actually trying to actually take action on and what are you trying to do from taking that action. But it's better to be acting in a small scale than in a large scale. So they were my 4 main points. So I just wanted to share with you just one example of a project that we've been working on. And this is the photo. So what do you think the problem is? It is in Australia, so what's the problem?
We need more windmills.
So the problem is to do with renewable energy. And the problem's to do with, we've got a lot of infrastructure. So we're not like a Kenya or some other countries where it's greenfields. So they're leapfrogging us in terms of renewable energy use. We actually have a lot here. And so what that means is there's a lot of crossroads with things, despite individual actors in the system really want to see things change. There's some fundamentals that just stops it, grinds it to a halt. So this particular example I'm going to share with you on permission of ARENA, the Australian Renewable Energy Agency. The GM, Danny DeShuter there, we've been working with him for the last 6 months. This particular project has really come off the bat that we actually need a do place. Not a think place, not a think tank, an actual do tank. So this came off the bat of a really strong need to recognise we've got to try things differently, and we need to do it in a way that embraces some of the earlier points that I talked about. So the idea that we can get in and act quickly, we can embrace the system, we can invite voices in that might not normally come together, and actually also empower people to reimagine what the possibilities of a world might be if we saw it as a different place than it is now. So I won't go through all the details unless you're oh, no worries, I'll fly through it, Gary, don't worry. So, main points from the slide, but I wanted just to highlight there were 3 kind of drivers for why this particular approach was needed. So one of them was around this increasing recognition that collaboration just wasn't happening to break through on everything that was at Crossroads. So the whole idea was this was about understanding what government can do, so as an agency that provides funding or grant to the early sort of front end of the system, so not the full implementation end. That's a different part of the government. But the whole idea is that what they get in their door as grant proposals was kind of like, well, is this fundamentally going to shift the system? So this is saying we have to try something different. So how might we proactively trigger some really interesting and different ideas in a very complex system? And how might we actually get people together and actually deliberately give them a creative and innovative environment to work within? The second was to find a way to accelerate. So that fast and slow design point, this is an interesting complex system that actually needs a bit of both. It needs to slow down, but actually needs to speed up because there's an enormous amount of inaction, not because people at individual levels don't want action, but when you add it all up, it's just like, where do you start? The fifth point is about curation, and in most systems that provide money from a government point of view, you need to be able to provide some knowledge back, so it's just a sharing point. And effectively, that just hasn't been done as well as it could. So this project, just to share with you, was actually a 12-week co-design process, engaging the system at large to say, well, how might we actually trigger some innovation and drive some action in a system that seems to be kind of stuck? So I won't go through the details there, but the point is what you can do in 12 weeks is a short amount of time, again, fast, but you're actually looking at a slow design problem. So you're kind of holding the two together. The way it simply played out, and I just want to highlight what we ended up doing to kind of bring some action to this, was to say we need to actually start in a different place. So design thinking often likes to think, well, we can try to marry up what's going on today. Sorry, it doesn't want to marry up what's going on today. It's saying how might we look from an engagement model, moving into an envisaging or a possibility of what could be different, and how might we frame a different starting point for our conversation that's not about trying to reconcile where we are today, because you just wouldn't get anyone in a room. And then we talk deliberately about what sort of focus intensive innovation process might we go through. And what might we learn from that, and what sort of impact over time might we be able to achieve in terms of things we'd invest in. So all I want to do is zoom and show you to say that some of this is actually about making people really uncomfortable. So design thinking does that really well. Not to make you go, I don't know what to do. It's to say you need to get uncomfortable because at the moment, being comfortable is not making the change you need to see. So we had a room of about 25 different people from across the energy sector, from the people that generate, transport the energy, from people who sell it, from people who consume it, and all the lobbyists, politicians, a whole mix in the room, who normally wouldn't come together. So this was actually the first time that whole mix was together. So we said, there you go, that's your workshop. Everyone's like, what? That's like a kid's playground. They're like, what? This is not what I'd expect to see. So what we did do is say to them, well, you're part of a conversation and you need to contribute now to some different ways of thinking about this system that doesn't seem to be able to move forward. So this is a photo of the group actually deliberating over all the questions they had. So design thinking, again, that exploration, the courage to explore, we just asked everyone to tell us every single question you've got. Every single question you've got about how we can make a change. Don't answer it, just all the questions. And we had a wall of all the questions. Now, most people would go freaking out, well, how are we going to answer those questions? That's fine. Part of the design process is to embrace those questions. So we then asked them to take the courage to innovate. So some of the blockers and head on were we can't materialise the solutions impossible. So we asked them to build the future energy market. We only had one hypothesis. It has to be centred around the customer. You and me. Because there was a hypothesis in the future, you and I can trade electricity. We can trade energy. So if I want to give my mum some energy because she doesn't have much money, I can give her my electricity that I've captured from my roof. So it was this whole kind of provocation of, wow, what would it be like? So they ended up building those systems to try to actually communicate what it might mean. And there's an example of the peer-to-peer consumer trading market. Only a couple more slides and I'm done, Gary. I just want to share this quote with you because it was important that we interviewed people both pre, during and post to gather our own evaluation of was this actually going to be a helpful mechanism to get people to come together and to provoke and think differently. So I won't read out the details there, but effectively it's just saying this is great because there's no other mechanism to allow us to really provoke and come together and start to play out the possibilities of what change might be. And just on that particular project, it's moved beyond just the exploring and the kind of like, well, what's the possibilities? And we now actually have 6 potential experiments that will get small amounts of funding for small amounts of time to demonstrate potentially new models of the future. So one of those models we're looking at is actually to do with energy usage that is in the palm of your hand, and that's been trialled in the ACT in Victoria with people who wouldn't normally come together. So I share this with you because design thinking's application is at all sorts of problem spaces, and I'm particularly proud of this because of the leadership that was shown in the government agency, as well as the political system. So we had people from the ACT, political system involved, and it's really encouraging to see people going, wow, we can actually do something. And there's something about action is also, like it's not just a concept that doesn't get it deployed. We actually said this is the game plan. You've got 100 days, show us what you can do. That is the end of my introduction. Thank you.